Here at Hempfield, there are 5 pathways to graduations that students can go through. And joining me today is Ms. Diesley to talk about those different pathways. Thank you for being here.
Sure. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So I first wanted to start off by asking just what are the different pathways and what are the kind of defining features of each one?
So the pathways to graduation were established by the Pennsylvania Department of Education, and this is the first year that they go into effect with this year's graduating class. The simplest pathway, Pathway 1, is just for students to score proficient or advanced on the 3 Keystone exams. That's the easiest way to get through the pathways to graduation. The second pathway is a pathway that involves a composite score of the 3 Keystone exams. So it's possible for a student to get a basic and then 2 proficients or advanced, and when those scores add up to meet a minimum score, that would also be acceptable for a pathway to graduation. Those 2 are based simply on Keystone scores. As we move into the other pathways, they start to become a little bit more cumbersome in trying to designate what requirements are necessary in each one. All students, no matter what, are still required to take the Keystone exam. That doesn't go away with the Pathways to Education because we're still responsible for reporting for federal purposes. But as we move into the other pathways, Pathway 3 is the CTE concentrator pathway. That pathway is for students who are attending CTC, and they must demonstrate likelihood of being successful in their careers through the testing that happens at CTC or through industry certifications. Pathway 4 is the alternate assessment pathway. That pathway allows students to create or to score a certain minimum score on the SAT or an AP test or the PSAT or the ASVAB for military admissions that would allow students to then meet their requirements. Pathway 5 is the most complicated. That's the evidence-based pathway, and that requires criteria in 2 different tiers, and this would be areas such as industry credentials or acceptance to a 2-year college or acceptance to or proof of a job beyond graduation or something else that would show post-secondary readiness.
And then my next question was, what would you recommend to students who are looking to explore the different options?
So first of all, we still want students to be successful on the Keystone, so we want all students to do their best on the Keystones and enable them to graduate with Pathway 1 or 2. But if that's not working for a student, then they really should be working with their guidance counselors on how to establish the correct criteria for Pathways 3, 4, or 5.
Why do you think it's important for students to look at the other options?
Not everyone tests well, and so we want to make sure that even though they might be able to demonstrate their career readiness in a way other than just the Keystone tests. They also are important, for instance, for a student who was sick and missed an exam and didn't have a chance to make it up, for students who move from other states to Pennsylvania and don't have Keystone exams because they moved here as a junior or a senior, and then they would be able to demonstrate proficiency, for instance, with an SAT score. So those options tend to be necessary for students with unusual circumstances.
So what is Hempfield looking to do differently with these pathways in the coming years?
First and foremost, we're trying to make sure that everyone's aware of them, since this is a Pennsylvania state requirement, and we want to make sure that students understand the importance of the Keystones and taking the Keystone seriously. So we're communicating with every mailing related to the Keystone exams. The pathways go home. It's part of freshman orientation now. It's in the course guide, so we're just doing our best to communicate. But we're also looking at where are places within our curriculum that we could prepare students for if they would end up in that Pathway 5 that requires industry certifications. Are there different credentials that we could build specifically into our courses? For instance, next year we're looking at some in technology education that would give some certifications through our electronics or materials and processes class. We've been exploring some in the BCIT department for perhaps Microsoft Office certification, or in FCS for safe food certification. So while we don't have all of those in place yet, we're looking for different ways that we can embed those right in our courses to make it easier for students to meet that fifth pathway if necessary.
Okay, thank you for joining me. So now on to our next feature for this month's episode of Hempfield Happenings.